to do a bit of housekeeping, just to remind everyone that today's event will be recorded and it will be shared with our online audience later on today. Phones, if I could please ask everyone to mute their phones or switch them off, whatever you find is more convenient. There's no fire drills booked for today, so if you do hear a fire alarm, please don't run, but make an orderly line and we'll take you to safety. With that, I think that's all of the housekeeping. One last thing to mention is that, of course, we always value your feedback. So please do fill out our survey at the end of the day or earlier in the day if you want to. We do value your feedback and we can then use it to make our things bigger and better at the STC. So to begin, I would like to invite a very special sponsor for today's event, that's MPA. We've got Mel Alfieri, who will tell us a little bit more about MPA and what they do. So Mel, over to you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Silverstone this morning. My name's Mel Alfieri, and I'm the Business Development Manager at MPA. So who are MPA? So we're an SME, like many of you. We've just celebrated our 15-year birthday, all's good, and we're on that growth journey, as are so many of you. At MPA, we're on a mission to release, accelerate and sustain world-leading innovation delivered by forward-thinking UK businesses. We're guided at every stage by our 3 core values, and they are to always put our client first, to achieve excellence in all we do, and most importantly, to innovate at every opportunity. We love innovation. That's what our passion is, and myself and the team at MPA are here to support you on your growth journey. I don't like the B word, I don't like the C word, but they all have had an impact on our business. So as our businesses continue on their journey post-COVID, we will need to be even more creative and innovative to adapt to this new normal. It's our duty to build a future which is greener and safer and healthier than before. This means revitalising our whole system of science, research and innovation to release its potential and to unlock and embrace talent and diversity, resilience and adaptability, and tackle our biggest challenges, such as the net zero carbon emissions. We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to strengthen our global position in research and unleash a new wave of innovation. And touched on talent, embracing talent. I know when I speak to our clients, it's a big thing. How do you attract talent? How do you keep talent? That's something that is a challenge to all of us. Our interest is in promoting growth within our economy, leading the way people get rewarded for innovation. And just to leave you with a question and thought before we start the main presentations. So what are your barriers for innovation? What are your blockers and how can we support? Thank you.
Thank you, Mel, that was great. So if you want to find out more, we can share Mel details with you and you can get in touch. So without further ado, I will hand over to Nick Flanagan from Clearview, who will tell us a little bit more. Oh, and Kelly Morris, who's online joining us today, who will tell you a little bit more about where we are now and what can we expect going forward.
Morning, everybody. Well, first and foremost, it's great to be here. Thank you to Lena, Trudy, Pim and the guys for inviting Clearview to participate today. I think we've been a member of the cluster now for probably 3 or 4 years, but not really actively participated beyond attending as a delegate or being very conscious of some of the activity that's going on. So when we were approached to say, would you like to support today's event? For me, it was fantastic. It's right where our sweet spot is in terms of Clearview as an organisation. I guess we go back 40, 50 years in different guises, and our primary objective is to provide solutions, intelligent transport solutions to the likes of National Highways, Transport Scotland, local authorities, and effectively trying to make our whole road network greener, safer, more intelligent. So being part of this consortium, if you like, for us is great because it allows us to share ideas, bounce ideas. And I guess we're not a typical member really, because I guess there's quite a strong automotive presence within the room. And we're not necessarily an automotive business. I say we're more of an intelligent transport solutions business. But we've become under increasing pressures, I'm sure everybody else has in the room, from both our customers, our clients and our key stakeholders to work with them to become more sustainable. to take on board the goals and strategies set out by COP26 and the UN. And we've been working very closely. And as a result of that, Kelly Morris, who's with me today, our head of sustainability, will be taking you through in much more detail the general scene setting and where we see the landscape as it is today. And from our own perspective, we recently launched our sustainability strategy and set ourselves some quite aggressive goals. We've looked to set out a plan that says we as a business across our operations will be net zero by 2025. And you may look at that and say, wow, that's ambitious. Well, it is, but actually, one of the things that Clearview has been doing for a number of years is actually delivering quite low power solutions, often have our renewable energy, solar, wind. So in some ways, we've already got a head start in achieving some of those objectives that have been set out. So for us today to be able to share that with you is fantastic. So without further ado, and just to do a bit of scene setting, I'll hand over to Kelly and she will share with you the bigger picture, which then no doubt I'll be handing over to the panel at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lee.
Hi there. So I think, Lena, to be able to share my screen, I'll try it just now and hopefully it works. Can everyone see the slides?
Not just yet. There we go.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, thank you very much, Nick, for the introduction. And again, thanks to Lena and Trudy for the opportunity to be here and take part. I have been asked to sort of set the scene today, and apologies if I'm sort of going back to basics in terms of the things that we're talking about around the sort of Paris Agreement and COP26 and the Sustainable Development Goals. I know many of you will be very well aware of it. I'm also aware that it is a sort of heavy automotive contingent that's in the room, and so there's that natural urge to speak only about the vehicles and how you are going to evolve, I guess, your industries and offerings with the vehicles that are going to sort of tick the boxes that are needed nowadays. Apologies, I've just noticed there's a typo in the slide that's up at the moment, which distracted me there. So with that urge to, I guess, focus on the automotive side of things and go straight to the vehicles, one of the things I wanted to do was just to bring it back to each of you as a business, and even the SMEs, you know, and our sponsor for today that's in the room, an accountancy business. You know, there are still sustainability requirements on you as a business to be more carbon efficient and achieve your own net zero goals. And so I kind of wanted to widen the discussion out into that overall and share a wee bit about what we've been doing to set the scene. So for today, a couple of things I'm going to run through: where we are now, what is the real driver for change. We'll talk a wee bit about the Sustainable Development Goals. We'll talk about global climate action generally, and then we'll talk about the government commitments to net zero and how they impact on us as an industry and individually as businesses. And then just summarise the challenges and opportunities before we hand over to the panel discussion. So in terms of where we are now, according to a Future of Mobility report by KPMG, today's mobility offering is congested, inefficient, harmful to the environment, there are fatalities, and it's increasing in cost, which paints a pretty grim picture actually, and doesn't make most of us that are working within the industry feel very good or positive about ourselves, because we feel we're doing lots of good things in terms of the mobility industry. However, that is the picture that's painted at the moment. And the promise of future mobility is around a safer, more efficient offering. It's economic mobility, so it's about driving the economy rather than hindering the economy. And it's also less impact on health and environment. And there are three main technology trends that are going to help achieve that future mobility offering. And the first one is no surprise. There'll be loads of discussion on this today, but it's the electric, hydrogen and fossil-free vehicles. There's connected and autonomous vehicles, and then there's MaaS, which is mobility as a service, which for anyone that isn't aware is about offering people options across all modes of transport, particularly active travel and public transport, to reduce the reliance on vehicles and make, I guess, transport and mobility just more inclusive and a bit more efficient overall. So that's the three main technology trends. Now, individually, if any one of those is to be implemented at the moment, in itself, it would cause significant disruption to the sort of the industry and the ecosystem. But what we're actually looking at doing is implementing all three of these at the one time, which is really going to cause, you know, combined, it will cause unprecedented levels of change. So why is there this sudden urgency to do this now, and why is it all coming at once? Well, I guess in terms of the mobility industry over the last 50 years, you could say there's been a series of incremental changes that have been implemented, lots of bolt-ons to increase capacity, to improve things gradually. So if I take the rail industry, for example, it's all about how do we get more people onto the trains? Well, let's just keep adding carriages and lengthening the trains. And eventually you get to a point where the infrastructure is no longer sufficient to sustain those longer rolling stock. So then you have selective door opening so that people can only get out certain doors because the platforms are smaller. And then we start to get into all of these issues and we reach a tipping point where the infrastructure is no longer sufficient to deliver the mobility services that we need. And that's kind of as a result of all the different bolt-ons over the years. However, that's not to say over the last 50 years there haven't been technological advancements, because there have been, and there's been a huge amount of innovation across the industry. And I hope some of you will agree with me that we work for a lot of government clients, and the appetite for innovation is absolutely huge. That's often a qualifying criteria when you're tendering for new contracts. But I have to admit that the appetite for innovation is always much bigger than there's always a reluctance to really follow through on delivering it. So whilst the clients want to hear the innovative ideas, they don't necessarily want to implement those ideas, because in transportation generally, it's a very risk-averse industry and safety always seems to come first for the right reasons. And so the thought of implementing anything that's new or risky at all doesn't seem to happen. And so that's kind of been a bit of a constraint on technology advancements, I think, up until this point. But suddenly now there's this surge to move forward and bring all this new technology through. And so if the technology hasn't been the driver in itself, then what is? And it's, I think, absolutely obvious that the climate crisis is probably one of the main catalysts for change, not just across our industry, but across every industry at the moment. And the need to take urgent action over the next 10 years to reduce emissions is really what's driving the need for a lot of these things. And that's reflected in the fact that we're looking at electric vehicles, we're looking at connected and autonomous vehicles, we're looking at mobility as a service, everything, all of these things all revolve around reducing emissions, which is, I guess, a real catalyst for change. But the reason that I have sustainability in there and not just climate change is because there's already been an undercurrent, I think, over the years in terms of transportation and mobility being much more inclusive. As I say, something that shapes the economy and drives the economy rather than hinders it. Something that's, I guess, fairer, easier, more choices. And so you can't really deal with the climate crisis without also just being sustainable generally. So there's no point in protecting the environment if we're not looking after our people. There's no point in having an environmentally friendly transport system if it's not inclusive and fair. So that's where the sustainability piece comes in, and that is the big buzzword at the moment, and it will be for a long time. And so that really is the driver for transformational shift at this time. So in terms of sustainability generally, again, many of you will know this, but the Sustainable Development Goals were actually established by the UN in 2015. So there's 17 interlinked global goals. So many of them are about, eradicating poverty, equality and inclusivity across the world, etc. But together, they're designed as a blueprint for all of the countries and governments across the world to be able to achieve a better and more sustainable future, and basically to ensure that we're all working together towards one cause, one common cause, and that's what these goals are about. Now, I've selected a small sample of these goals, really just because I feel these could potentially be the ones that are most relevant to us and yourselves in the room from a business perspective and how you operate as a business. So the first piece here I'll touch on is obviously there's a demand from government in terms of climate action. So that's the first one. So there's a demand for climate action, and with that comes the need for more sustainable cities and communities. To create those sustainable cities and communities, we need industry and innovation and infrastructure, and that's where we come in. That includes the road infrastructure, it includes the vehicles, and it includes everything else that we're offering as an industry. But to offer that innovation and infrastructure, we need to be much more responsible in terms of our consumption and production. Along that same vein, we also have to ensure good health and well-being, as well as fairness and equality in terms of our people. And we also have to be offering decent work and economic growth. So there's quite a lot of responsibilities on us there. So it isn't just about taking climate action, it actually touches each one of these goals. And for us as a business, one of the actions that we took was to look at all of the Sustainable Development Goals and pick the ones that we felt that we could really contribute towards most. So that's kind of a helpful thing to do. So just, I guess, moving on in terms of the climate piece again, which is relevant in terms of vehicles. So the Paris Agreement was adopted in COP21 in 2015, and that covers climate mitigation, adaptation and finance. And that was really about identifying this need to keep global temperatures under 2 degrees. Following on from that, we obviously had the big circus of COP26, which was in Glasgow, and we as a business were very fortunate to be able to attend and be involved in that. And I'll touch on the reason why we call it a circus in a minute, but out of that COP26, you'll have seen there's lots of news reports in terms of what actually came out of it, what is it we need to do moving forward. So there was a Glasgow Climate Pact, and through that, there was a number of commitments made. So the first one was about recognising the emergency, and that's about definitely committing to keeping temperatures below 2 degrees, but actually pursuing as much as possible to keep them below 1.5. Accelerating action in this critical decade. So there's lots of talk about 2050, 2045, and the reality is if we don't take the real urgent action now in this 10 years, we've got absolutely no chance of being able to achieve the goals we've set for 2050. So we really should forget about those other decades and focus just now on 2030. Moving away from fossil fuels, that was probably the most contentious of discussions at COP26. I think there was some disagreement around, I think originally they wanted to eradicate coal, and now it's about just reducing coal as a fuel source. Delivering on climate finance. So there is a commitment to spend £100 billion on climate friendly initiatives across the world. And that's all something that we can be part of, and we can get some of that funds that are out there. Stepping up support for adaptation. So that's actually around the developing countries who probably suffer most from climate crisis, and that's about giving them the support and the funds to be able to adapt to the challenges that they now face as a result of climate change. Completing the Paris Rulebook, that's an interesting one. That's basically just saying this is a commitment to agree everything that we couldn't agree on over the last few years, so they've put that in there. And then focusing on loss and damage is about mitigating the loss and the impact that's happening across the world at the moment. And then again, specifically for us, there's that commitment to cars. So there was 30 countries and 6 major vehicle manufacturers and cities who agreed that all new car and van sales would be zero emissions globally by 2040 and zero emissions in leading markets by 2035. And I guess you need to read into what they mean by leading markets, probably populations where there's a higher concentration of vehicles, etc. But I know that certainly in Scotland, there are targets to have sort of petrol vehicles in particular areas off the roads earlier than HGVs and things like that as well. So it's very different in different countries how they define these leading markets and break that down. But that is the big commitment, is zero emission vehicles by 2040. So all of that, I'll just go back for a wee second. In terms of that COP26 circus I was referring to, so there has been criticism that these commitments are a compromise, that they didn't really move things further forward, and they're not going to get us where we need to be. There's also a compromise that COP26 was a bit of a circus that came to town, and now that it's left, what do we do? And whilst I think there's maybe some element of truth in that, I think probably what it did for us as a business, and also probably for maybe more Scotland than the rest of the UK, but I think the fact that it was coming to the UK actually sort of instigated action, particularly by the governments and businesses, to really start looking at net zero targets and how they were going to be more carbon efficient. Certainly the governments have now implemented their own goals, which will feed down into us. And we as a business, I know that when we were looking to join COP26, we had to sign up to the SME Climate Hub's Race to Zero, and we had to commit ourselves to being net zero by 2050 and halving our own emissions by 2030. And that's unfortunately no longer relevant, and it's no longer good enough, but that's what we were being asked to do at the time. And I think in all honesty, if we hadn't been asked to do that, I'm not sure we would be as aggressively pushing towards sustainability as an organisation now. So that certainly has been useful for us, and I think for many other businesses in the area. So in terms of those government commitments, obviously the UK government is committed to being net zero by 2050. The Scottish Government is committed to being net zero by 2045. Now, I've just included National Highways and Transport Scotland in here because they are particular clients of ours. But essentially what happens is the government mandate those targets down into their different government bodies and agencies. So National Highways and Transport Scotland then develop their own strategies and commitments, which include a whole host of initiatives. So when we look at this as a business, we think, okay, we need to be net zero by 2050. But actually, we do a lot of work in Scotland and they want to be net zero by 2045. So 2050 is too late for us. So now we're looking at a 2045 target as a business. Then we start looking at the National Highways reports, and it actually says it's looking for all of their plant and maintenance equipment to be net zero by 2030, I think it is. So if that's, 2035. So if that's the case, we've lost another 10 years. So now again, as a business, we're now looking at being net zero by 2035 if we want to still be a supplier to National Highways in that respect. And so what you can see here is from the very top, these goals have been set. They flow down through the government agencies, they flow down the transport operators and contractors, and then by the time they get to us, the SMEs and contractors at the bottom, we're looking at net zero targets of 2030 across our entire value chain. So that includes our products, our services, as well as our business operations. And that's really quite a startling realisation for us when we realised that we had to accelerate our targets and act very quickly. Now, the risk of not doing this is if we don't achieve these targets by 2030, we might struggle to be able to comply to do business with the likes of National Highways and Transport Scotland moving forward. So just as a caveat on this, obviously this is our perception. We believe that as a result of all of these accelerated targets that filter down to us, that 2030 is the date for us. It's certainly not a date that's been mandated to us by National Highways or at Transport Scotland, but it's what we feel we need to do in response. So in terms of the impact on industry, and again, I know we're going to be talking a lot about automotive generally, but as just general businesses, the impact of those targets, I mean, this is, I guess, across a number of 4 key areas, but your service and product offering. So again, for us as an example, we have to look across our entire product offering and see what we can do to make each of our products and services much more sustainable and carbon friendly. Now, fortunately for us, we already had quite a large renewable energy offering. Many of our products were already green in a sense, but we are now looking at ways to make them greener again and much more sustainable, because that's what's going to be required of us. So if as a business you're not looking at what your carbon footprint is of your products and services and how you deliver, that's something you absolutely should be doing as quickly as possible, because that's going to be the criteria moving forward. It's not going to be about, is it cost effective? Is it safe? It's going to be, is it sustainable? And if you can't tick that sustainable target, you're probably not going to win the contracts and secure the work moving forward. Also from an operations, people and supply chain perspective, so it changes everything for us as businesses in terms of how we operate and do business. So just things like, your business travel, for example, there's a real ethos out there now, particularly with working from home. If you don't need to travel, don't go. And as much as I would have loved to have come to Silverstone today, when you really look at it, does it make sense to be travelling down for a sort of 15-20 minute chat? Is that a sustainable thing to do? Probably not. So it does affect our approach to business travel. Also our fleet and operations and vehicles, and we'll touch on this later in the panel discussion, but the need for us to transition to a sort of fully electric vehicle fleet, and various other things that we need to do in the business to make our operations more sustainable. In terms of our people, there's going to be massive change for the people in our organisations. Job roles are going to change. They need to know things that they didn't have to know before in terms of emerging legislation, new sort of auditing that's going to come into place. And that really is going to affect individuals. And it's important that we make sure any aim to become more sustainable as a business to suit our clients, that we're also focusing on the people that work in the company and making it a just transition for them. And that involves getting them on training, offering them mentoring and support, and the opportunity to maybe upskill and move into different roles as the business develops over the years. And then, of course, there's our supply chain. So there's a real need to engage with our supply chain as quickly as possible. One of the questions I remember asking at COP26 was, if you're a small business and you're looking at your own carbon footprint and your own net zero targets and you haven't quite set them, it feels a wee bit I don't know, it feels wrong to start talking to your supply chain about what they're doing in that arena and challenging them in terms of their carbon footprint. So I was of the mind that we really had to have all of our ducks in a row before we started talking to our supply chain. And actually the response was absolutely not. You're not speaking to your supply chain to start hitting them over the head for targets and goals and carbon efficiency. You're talking to your supply chain to figure out where they are in this whole environment. You know, are they doing anything around sustainability? And if they're not, can you help them and get them on the way? Because at the end of the day, you will not meet your own goals if your supply chain isn't part of that process and on board with you. So that was quite interesting. Quickly then, in terms of investment decisions as well, as a business, you know, there's a lot of money that you're going to have to spend to become more sustainable, not least on transitioning your vehicles and products and services. But I guess the big challenge in terms of investment decisions is, do you do it now when all these sustainability offerings are very expensive, haven't really been trialled and tested properly? And also there's a newer version that always comes out. So, you know, myself as an electric vehicle driver, you know, felt quite chuffed that I was doing the right thing, having an EV. And every time I go to any of these sustainability and climate discussions, people say, well, you know, electric isn't the only answer. I'm going to wait in hydrogen because that's a better solution. And so it sometimes feels that you can't even do right for doing wrong. And that's the way it feels as a business. You know, as a transition to electric vehicle, we will have to spend much more money. And that will implicate our operations in terms of our field and service operators having to go out and take time to charge their vehicles up when they're used to just going to the petrol station. So these are all big impacts and decisions that we are going to have to make as a business. And then finally, monitoring and reporting. There is going to be a heavy administrative burden on all of our organisations moving forward in terms of how we capture and monitor our carbon footprint and how we capture and monitor that of our supply chains. And I certainly am finding that a lot of tenders and contracts that we are being asked to sort of fill out, some of the questions are revolving around not just, you know, who is your supply chain and what is it they do for you, but the question is, who is their supply chain? Where are they located in terms of modern slavery? What's their carbon footprint? So, I mean, we're really starting to get into whole different areas and avenues that is very time consuming. And obviously with all of these things, there always comes a new ISO accreditation that is essential to have. So these are all the types of implications that are likely to affect your business. But without the picture being too bleak, there are loads of opportunities. And I would say, just looking at this at the moment, if there's one thing that I would recommend you do as a business, it's probably try and focus someone on looking into these things and trying to apply for whatever grant and funding and support is available to help, because there is funding available to help you deliver on each of these 4 aspects. And then finally, just on to the last slide, just a bit of a summary. So these top-down targets that the government have set in terms of 2050 net zero emissions, they are absolutely necessary, and we understand the rationale behind it. But unfortunately, they have a really adverse effect on the supply chain, and particularly the SMEs and those of us at the bottom of the food chain, I guess, because by the time they filter down to us, our timeframes to do these things are drastically reduced. Also, in terms of the challenges, just the overwhelm and the cost associated for business owners, you know, particularly the legislation and the whole world of sustainability and climate adaptation and things is changing day by day. And as I said, no sooner do you think you're doing a good thing till you find out there's something else you should be doing. No sooner had we signed up to be net zero by 2050 till we realised we had to do it by 2030. So that's the type of things that are going to be challenging for us moving forward. 2050 is just something that I think we probably shouldn't even be discussing anymore, because it is too late. And so really it is all about 2030. And if there's anything I could impress on you as business owners, it would be that. Do everything you can in this decade. Because very soon, you know, the carrot that's been dangled in terms of here's all the incentives to do good things, that's eventually going to turn into a big jaggy stick, and it's going to hit all of us when we really aren't expecting it. And so it's important that you try and take action now, if you haven't already. I've also mentioned about the fact that SMEs have been, I guess, maybe overlooked in this whole process and setting of targets. And we certainly as a business feel that SMEs have a really massive role to play here, particularly when you combine all of us. But for our business, in terms of our sustainability strategy, it really is to ensure that we might be a small business, but we will have a big impact. And that's what we're aiming to do. I've talked already about knowing where to invest and when, and again, this is really important. There's no point in investing in electric vehicles across your whole business right now if it's going to affect and impact your operational delivery to your clients, or it's going to impact the cost to your business to the extent that you can't afford those costs. So in making these investment decisions, you really do need to consider planet, as well as people, and purpose and profit. And that's how you make the decision. It can't just be all about the environment. It has to be a sort of holistic sustainability decision. And then there's this real sort of focus on modal shift in electric vehicles as being the silver bullet, particularly with some of the governments. Now, National Highways, interestingly, accept that cars and vehicles are part of the solution. National Highways promote the fact that there are going to be there will be an increased volume of traffic on our roads in 2050, and a net zero world in 2050 does include vehicles. Transport Scotland, on the other hand, are very much more focused on how do we reduce vehicles on the roads, and they are much more focused on active travel, modal shift, public transport. And it's quite interesting, obviously, with the political elements as well. So the Green Party has a major influence in Scotland. And so sometimes I think there's a pressure on Transport Scotland to be seen not to be investing in roads anymore, because if you're investing in roads, well, you can't really be committed to sustainability, can you? And I suppose that's a danger, because particularly in Scotland, there are a lot of rural roads and there will always be a need for vehicles. So I guess my worry for the industry is that if we keep focusing on modal shift and active travel and not acknowledging that cars are still part of the solution and they're not a big dirty word, then we could end up having roads that are congested and not as safe as they currently are, because all of these extra vehicles are still going to come onto them regardless. And I think it's important we're prepared for that. So in terms of the opportunities for us as a business, well, I guess the main one is that we can just do the right thing. The reason to get into sustainability is because it is the right thing to do. And just to keep putting it off and think that we'll eventually get there, it's definitely not the right approach. I can tell you from our perspective, the minute that we've got involved in it and got started, it's actually been really beneficial for our business. It's helped drive our sort of growth strategy as a business. It's providing real clear purpose and direction. And it feels good to know that we're not just ignoring this big dark cloud that's hanging over us. Secondly, take the carrots. There are tons of initiatives and opportunities out there just now. You only need to go and look for them. Try and be part of that solution and use it as an opportunity to raise awareness of your business and offering. The third one again was, don't wait on your ducks being in a row. Get out there and involve your supply chain at the moment, collaborate and come up with different solutions. And then the fourth one about being part of the solution. So in terms of what we do, we obviously will put in sort of sensors to collect data. We collect and monitor traffic data. We also put in solar powered studs that can improve visibility in the roads, increases decision-making time from 3 seconds to 30 seconds. There's active travel monitors. There's loads of different things that we do, but actually we're realising now that our clients want to combine those things. So our solutions now involve a software platform which brings in road traffic data, active travel data and air quality monitoring. And that's allowing us to offer a far better solution to our clients. And that's something that, we really should all look at. Equally with our technology, we're introducing the capacity to be able to talk and communicate with connected and autonomous vehicles in the future. And again, these are the things we should be doing now so that we're ready for the future. Speculate to accumulate. There's again just a final one mentioned about these funds and funding pots that are available. I would recommend you go onto National Highways designated funds, as well as any other government funding that's available out there for your particular industry. They have often got a lot of challenges, the industrial strategy challenges as well, where they are looking for solutions to problem. And when I say they, I mean the government. They have problems that they can't solve, and they want us to solve them. So it's for us to go in and get together with our sort of peers and industry colleagues and supply chain and try and come up with the solutions to those problems and seek the funding to deliver and pilot those projects. It's a great opportunity, and it could actually change the whole future of your business, and that's something again that we're doing and benefiting from. So I would highly recommend it. And finally, just collaboration is key. You know, we're not going to be able to do this alone. We are finding, even as a small business, the time and resource and effort that it's taken. And I already find myself reaching out to other small businesses and saying, hey, do you already have an electric vehicle policy in your business? Because we're struggling with things like, how do you deal with expense claims? How do you deal with, you know, charging at home? Do we put chargers in people's houses as well as in our office car parks, etc.? So these are things that aren't very clear, but if you start talking to other businesses, you find that they've done these things before and you can really tap into that. And I guess my final sort of comment here is really just, if you don't jump on this sustainability train now and start doing things about it, someone else will. And if your products and your services aren't seen as sustainable moving forward, you are going to lose out and potentially risk for the business. So I think it is all about perspective and getting in early. I hope, Lena, that was what you were looking for. It was a bit of a catch-all, but I'm hopefully thinking that we can hand over to the panel now and move into that discussion.
Yes, thank you very much, Kelly. That was really in-depth, and we went into a lot of detail into the topic of what we're going to discuss now. So I won't babble on anymore. I will hand over to you, who is going to lead and moderate our panel today.
Good morning, everybody. Are you going to come and join us? Because I'm going to go sit on the side there, face myself in the middle. And Kelly, are you staying?
Yes.
Great. Good morning. Hi. My name is Jule. I work for a company called Enovation Consulting. We're upstairs, just 2 floors up. We have our own office. Come and visit. And I'll be moderating this panel today, in which we're talking sort of about the first half of this is about where are we now? What are the goals that have already been set? What are the things that we're already working towards before then this afternoon we move into something that might be a little further off, imagining the future, how we all have loved it forever. But yeah, let me introduce you to our panel, which is Richard Collins from CSR Accreditation. I've got McLaren from Clearview. I've got Simon, and I've forgotten your last name, Dalton from Husworth, and Richard Saxby from McLaren Applied, who I hope are going to help me shed some light on what we've been talking about here today. And I think, because I would be terrible at introducing you, I think the easiest thing is if we go around and everybody introduces themselves, but then also we already jump in with the first question, which is sort of, you know, we've been talking about the goals that have been set by COP26, but also the regulation that has been coming out in the years before around low to zero emission vehicles, around transport in general. If you want to introduce yourselves and then maybe also let us know what your more general thoughts on that are and what the opportunities, but also the limitations and barriers are for maybe your work specifically, but also the sort of transport and mobility industry.
Happy to, yeah. So my name is Richard Collins. I run the only global accreditation for social responsibility and sustainability. We're a consultancy agency. We provide training, and we have defined a new holistic view for social responsibility based on the 4 pillars of environment, community, philanthropy, and workplace. And these, just riffing on what Kelly was saying, because everything Kelly talked about there really has an impact on those 4 pillars as a framework that SMEs can use to measure what they are already doing. We're very proud to announce that Silverstone Technology Cluster became accredited a few months ago as demonstrating an area of leadership in terms of looking at those 4 pillars and basically saying, what are we doing about the environment within our organisations? What are we doing about our workplace in the way of building a good culture? Because this is about staff engagement, it is about retention, it is about what the next generation of talent are looking for when they want to go to a business. And it's also about consumer perceptions and also, these overarching social and environmental issues like climate change, like the drive to net zero, and like things like, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, the social impacts as well. And we also look at helping people, organisations, SMEs engage with their communities to build a better relationship with the places that they work and also to support local charities. So all of those things together show that you're a responsible business. And it's by, what we do is we independently validate and recognise that. So we help you, address your United Nations sustainability goals if that's what you want to do. We help you look at the ESG agenda, which I'm going to touch on a little bit later. We help you build a social value plan. And by doing all of these things, It is about retention, it's about recruitment, it's about getting successful tendering results. It's about building that supply chain relationship. It's about reputation. It's about the future. So I think, you know, organisations, SMEs especially, they need a framework that's easy and straightforward to understand. No complex, you know, complex language, and something that we can all get behind and we can all use to show that we are delivering on those things. In terms of the question around COP26 and the limitations and goals set around the future of mobility, I've just made a few notes about, and I'll try and cover those very quickly, because I think there are different levels of progress depending on where you are in terms of sectors. So, you know, we did a lot of work a while ago, seven or 8 years ago, with the SMMT. So the global manufacturers of cars, I think we're already well ahead of the game in terms of what the future of mobility looks like in terms of the EV market and eventually the hybrid market and what else might come beyond that. And they were putting pressure on the dealerships to match that. The gap between what the manufacturers were doing and what the dealerships were doing was huge. So the SMMT wanted to do a 7 steps to sustainability program as long as 10 years ago to try and encourage the dealerships to promote a better sense of responsibility towards their environmental concerns. In other words, these great big green glass houses with the doors open, all, you know, the lights on all day and stuff like that. I'm an EV driver as well. So the thing is, I've been driving for 5 years, and when I went to buy my first EV, the dealerships were actively putting me off. So we have got the manufacturers that were really ahead of the game. We got the dealerships at that point, which were really lagging behind, and that was because there was a lack of government. You know, we had the EV rollout, but the government were almost whispering it. It wasn't loud enough. And I think that needs to be much, much louder. So I think to meet the goals, the government's going to be a lot louder, a lot more forceful about what they can do and how we're going to achieve that. And I think, you know, the manufacturers are there, but then the infrastructure is not there. So the charge point infrastructure, the alternatives, so public transport, you know, cycling, walking, doing other things that take the pressure off having to use cars or vehicles. And of course, just behaviour change and education. So I think all of these things will drive. So do I think the goals are ambitious? I think they should be sooner, personally. I think 2040 is too long, 2035 is too far. I think we should be looking at trying to achieve net zero as soon as we possibly can, because there's absolutely no doubt that, you know, we are having a negative impact on the environment, and we are seeing it. Look at Australia, look at what's happening in Italy, look at what's happening in the Arctic. You know, it's right in front of us. We need to act now. So I think, you know, there are limitations. I think we set those limitations on ourselves. And I think I think Kelly made a good point that the thing about the SMEs is that there's a lot of us, and a lot of us doing small things will have huge impacts. So we can change. We can all make a stand and make a difference.
To get across to them the importance of sustainability, how that translates to the bottom line when they're driving the plan to put forward to deliver whatever level of return they're looking for over the next 2 to 3 years. It's very tough, and I don't think I'm alone as a MD of an SME in terms of how you balance those priorities. Because for me, Kelly, you know, has communicated the importance of being a sustainable organisation, translating into delivery of the COP26 goal. But when you're talking to a board of directors and non-execs who perhaps aren't quite as informed and quite as conversant with what does this actually mean, why is it so important? And then I've said, well, to really get to this point, and you talk about is there a number, is there a budget to get to net zero? So let me say, if I said, right, to the board, it's going to be £250,000 over the next 2 years for us to achieve our real objectives, work with our supply chain, work with our key stakeholders. They're probably going to say, what the hell are you doing that for? You know, we get it, but surely that money would be better invested in R&D or so. And it's a very difficult balance to strike, we find. And things like the transition to EV and within our fleet, when you look at the hard and fast numbers, you'd say, well, there's just no business case to support that in the context of what it is you're trying to do. But, you know, when you look at the big picture, then obviously it becomes much more sensible. So I think the challenge for all of us in supporting the COP26 goals, particularly for SMEs, is going to be that continual trade-off, if you like, between continuing to try and stay, first and foremost, relevant, profitable, because ultimately that's what you're there for, against the bigger picture of, you know, sustainability and everything else. So, you know, I'm still not entirely sure how things will play out. We know there's the whole political macroeconomic situation at the moment is so volatile. And will priorities change? Will it really, you know, manifest itself the way we think it will at the moment, achieving these goals, or is there actually a possibility it's not flavour of the month, flavour of the year? Other things will become more important. Other things will become politically more desirable. You know, economically, we don't know. So for SMEs to make those investment decisions and commit resources and time and effort into delivering these goals is a very difficult balance to strike.
Yes, sort of selling that commercial value of, you know, the long term, saying, yeah, I know it's going to be expensive now, but listen, it will pay off in the long run because there is a commercial value to sustainability as well. I just can't prove it to you right now with numbers on your table as hard when that's usually the current.
Yeah, and I think Kelly made the point, you know, for our clients, you know, for us to be able to continue to work with them, to be able to bid for work and bid for tenders, it's becoming more and more a you know, proportion of that response. Mm-hmm. You know, it may have been 5% of the tender situation, 5% of the market. This tender would be around what are you doing around corporate social responsibility? You know, very much a little bit tick box exercise. Now you're talking at probably 20-30% of the value in your response is very much around sustainability and CSR. Mm-hmm. So, you know, as I say, yes, absolutely. Don't get me wrong. We absolutely buy into it. We absolutely are doing everything we can as a business to support it, but there are some very practical and commercial challenges that may well prevent us getting there as quickly as we'd like to.
So I'm Simon Dalton, Managing Director of Delta Cosworth, which is the electrification part of Cosworth Group. And I guess, you know, on our side, we represent partly the product side of the potential solutions around this transition to net zero. So from a Cosworth perspective, obviously our history is more around internal combustion engines. But I think as a group, the transition really to looking ahead to the future started probably 18 months ago when Cosworth acquired Delta, who specialised in electrification, in particularly battery systems manufacture. But I think, you know, for us and the more, you know, the backbone of the business being around internal combustion engines, we have to look at different solutions. So that the team over in Northampton are already looking at hydrogen combustion, alternative fuels, the things that are going to make that transition a little bit easier. You know, I think all of the things that have been commented on are very valid. You know, you've got businesses that are they want to do the right thing, trying to do the right thing, but at the end of the day, you've still got to provide a profit and a return at some point, and that at some point needs to come still reasonably quickly. So I think, I mean, from what we see and the customers that we deal with, which are a lot of the OEMs, you know, it's a tall order to meet these COP26 targets. I think there's definitely a transitional phase to it. I can see that maybe things will draw back a little bit from those original targets, but you know, if you don't have those high targets, the hard targets, then you're definitely not going to be ready at the point when it comes to 2035. So people have got to keep pushing, and I think that from what we've seen over recent years is you've got a lot of opportunities for smaller companies to benefit from these changing circumstances, because there isn't one solution. There's lots of potential solutions, and a lot of the OEMs, certainly in the automotive sector, are struggling to decide what is the most appropriate for them. What does their business look like? What do their consumers want? So there's lots of opportunities because of the challenges in the market. But yeah, it's certainly it's a hard ask to make that transition. And I think there will be alternative solutions beyond. I mean, electric isn't the answer to everything. It's just part of the solution. So, you know, as a business, we have to look at what those opportunities are and try and predict them and present them to the consumer.
Yeah, hi. My name is Richard Saxby. I've been working for McLaren Applied for just a year, but previous to that, I was 22 years in Formula One. And as we know, Formula One is very much internal combustion formula. Certainly for the fans and for certain communities like Netflix, it's all about the race, and many cases it's all about the noise too. So a real challenge for me to try and bring new technology forward. So very much similar to what Simon has Simon's rhetoric. It's right now it's great that the targets are there. I see the targets moving every 5 years by 5 years. I don't know why it's 5 years. I don't know why it could be 1 year, 2 years. In motorsports, we deal with increments of seconds, not 5 seconds, 10 seconds. So it'd be quite nice to see some actual targets and stakes in the ground for us. But there are challenges, like Simon mentioned, from mainstream automotive OEMs. Just recently, Toyota and BMW have committed to a non-electrical future, and these are the biggest car companies in the world. So that does mean that they are working on other technologies quite clearly to meet those targets. Those targets are targets for those as well as ourselves as businesses. So by them not committing to a fully electric future, it does mean there are other things in the pipeline, and it's super exciting to be part of this transitional phase. We are, as McLaren Applied, we are offering a system that allows the vehicle to be controlled by whatever means necessary. So we have developed a system that doesn't necessarily have to be a battery-powered vehicle. Ultimately, it will be a battery-powered vehicle, whether it's hydrogen or not. But we've developed a technology which hopefully can spread across a number of different types of mobility. So that's what we're excited about. That's what we're here to fulfil, that little niche in the market, to ensure that to show people it can be done, and it is being done, and now it is being used. And the other thing as well is, obviously we've just committed to sign a deal with the Formula One Manufacturing Association and the FIA to commit to internal combustion engines to 2030. So Formula One have committed to internal combustion engines to 2030. So what does this tell us? You know, it's quite a confusing message to the public, as well as things like, most recently, my e-Golf cost £25,000 to have a battery change. So it's you know, these are really confusing times for people, not necessarily businesses, but for the average person on the street. So we have to, one of our biggest challenges is certainly education first. You know, these committals to 5 years ago to an EV, you know, all of a sudden 5 times 25, you know, 150 grand in service costs for your vehicles. So just be mindful that the education out there needs to be brought forward sooner rather than later to try and meet these targets.
Kelly, if it's okay with you, I'm going to skip you for this question because that was basically your presentation. Is that okay? Great. And because I do want to talk about something that you both just touched on, and you all sort of touched on, which is there are other solutions being developed, but realistically speaking, if we go outside right now and we say to anybody, you know, the words mobility and sustainability or motorsport and sustainability, they're going to say, oh, I don't like electric, like, you know, oh, I miss the sound. Like, very much the here and now, what we have right now is EVs. However, we have somehow, again, managed to tie ourselves to a finite resource, and also managed to create it in a way that China currently controls, I think, 80% of the market for EV batteries. Now, how do we, because knowing that for the foreseeable future, at least, that is probably what we're doing, because that's sort of what everybody has set themselves up for in the larger market. What do we do? How do we make sure that the solution that we've come up with for now is actually sustainable and we don't find ourselves in the same position?
I think probably have to look at 120 years because we've been that dependent on these fuels for that length of time. So it's not going to be a quick transition. Simon and I are doing everything we possibly can to make it easier to help people make decisions. But that's all we can do. We can present offerings, but it is up to the consumer to make that choice.
But are you talking right now about alternatives to EVs, or are we also talking about what can we actually do for, I don't know, in terms of better battery recycling, taking better care of where we actually get these resources from. How do we then bring them back into the cycle? How do we make sure that that the life cycle of sales is not as terrible as it is?
Yeah, I mean, from our side, we spend a lot of time looking at those opportunities around the battery, you know, stay of health in particular, to make it more sustainable as a product, you know, not just during the life of the vehicle, but then after that, it's all about looking after, managing, controlling, which is again the cross sector. It's not just the battery, it's the system that you need to consider. It's the thermal management, it's the control of everything. So that there's lots of things that we can do, and we are doing, to make sure that these solutions are more longer term. And also from a point of view of just saying that the solutions that we're offering and how do we get beyond the battery is, you know, we need to be thinking about a different solution, you know, and producing that different solution so it's ready for the market in the years to come, which you know we're doing as a group, and as I say, from a history of internal combustion engine, that business needs to transition to something else. So they're already doing it. They're looking at the opportunities that are there. So we, you know, the EVs, you almost say, well, that's done. What next? So we need to be working, you know, and I think everyone in their businesses need to be looking at, okay, what should we be doing next? Which is hard because there's so much uncertainty and the consumers view things differently now than what we would have, you know, 10, 20 years ago. So it's challenging, but those challenges bring opportunities.
And then I guess it also comes down again to that education piece of, you know, making sure the consumer also knows that they're not buying an EV and then sort of go, done. That's my bit.
I think there's another aspect as well here with the, you know, the guys saying that they're looking at what the future brings, that research is going to reduce that reliance on, you know, the batteries of today. But I think there's still a role to play with the OEMs too, as Tesla are doing at the minute, which is trying to improve their supply chain and reduce the reliance on China and in-source it into the US, enter into deals with graphite mines in far-flung corners of the world so they can actually build. And I think that's absolutely key because that ongoing reliance on China is a huge risk, you know, for lots of different reasons. And whilst we do want to focus on the next generation of technology, you've probably got a 5 to 10 year window whereby we're still going to have to manage with that, you know, existing technology and that existing supply chain. So OEMs have got, I think, all the responsibility to try and mitigate that risk by entering into strategic agreements with different suppliers to try and protect their own supply chain and that of the end user.
I want to talk a little bit about differing approaches and also something that Kelly said, you know, collaboration is sort of key, and how at the moment there are sort of pockets of different approaches that then, you know, especially people who are working with different industry, with different clients, then are having to sort of navigate. And for example, the Kelly's example about national highways sort of being very much aware or thinking that by 2050, whenever there will still be a bunch of cars on the road, whereas in Scotland the approach is now more modal shifts. You know, are we going into more public transport? What's that? How do you deal with that if your business is sort of serving both of them, but they're both going very different approaches?
Well, from a clearly perspective, I mean, I guess that we deal with it the way we've always dealt with it, because in lots of ways, Transport Scotland and National Highways, as was Highways England, have always operated quite differently. So from that, we've always been, I guess, led by different objectives by those two key stakeholders. Yes, the push for active travel in Scotland, fortunately for us, we can support those objectives. A lot of what we do is providing solutions to support the adoption of active travel. However, in National Highways, and it remains that way, are still adamant that the car will still be very much a part of that overall ecosystem. Again, for us, we can support that. So from our perspective, just as an organisation, I guess it's more about understanding where we channel our investment and where do we think that is best placed and where we will get, I guess, best bang for our buck, and look at our R&D and how those two organisations are going to evolve. So I think it is challenging, but it's never been any different. There's never really been an overarching strategy between those two organisations and the tier one operators, the network operators that sit below them. They all seem to operate very much independently. And dare I say, you know, in Wales, Welsh Assembly as well, there's no joined up strategy. There was, it was very easy for us. So we just have to, you know, align ourselves as best we can to both and make investment decisions based on that.
Probably a question of finding ourselves in that position in which every generation has ever found themselves, where they think they want, like, where they want to know what the future's going to bring, but it's like at the time when people thought horses were never going to be replaced by cars, and here we are. I don't know who rode here. I didn't. So.
I just want to ask a question more to do with track than technology necessarily, essentially about mobility as well. If we look at smart highways, smart motorways, stroke, all lane running, depending which way around you want to look at that. On the plus side, they're about 30 times cheaper than widening the motorway, which is a good thing. They're also a great use of technology in the ability to manage capacity, regardless of whether you read the Daily Mail or not. The point is, statistically speaking, they are good for managing capacity. So now that the government's retreating away from that, what went wrong with that? Because surely that is an example of technology affecting behaviour, affecting change, but actually now it's now seen to be not popular. So what went wrong with that, do you think?
I just think it was a very good idea, poorly executed. I think there was always going to be, the business case clearly made sense to go to all lanes and running, as you said, against rather than spending money investing, putting more lanes into the motorway. But I don't think enough was taken into account, and it's the people aspect, political aspect that says, okay, we're no longer. As soon as you had one incident, one accident on a smart motorway, it was always going to be taken out of proportion to a great extent, because the number of refuge areas that should have been put in were nowhere near enough. So if somebody breaks down in the fast lane of the motorway and the nearest refuge area is 500 metres away, it's something you need to work out. That's going to create an awful lot of noise. I don't
think it's the same people at the minute that are making the same sort of decision. Does that flag up a bit of a warning?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's lessons learned, isn't it? You've got to finally learn. But I think if you compare the data as well, I think if you look at the safety statistics against what was a traditional motorway, against smart motorways actually statistically are safer. It's just when there is an incident, it's a much bigger furore is created because there is nowhere else to go. So I think, you know, the case for smart motorways is still there. Yes, there's a moratorium, there's a review period, and then they're going to have to come back and say, okay, how are you going to do it differently? The precursor to it was obviously active traffic management, where you opened up the lane when you got congested, but you still contain a hard shoulder. Now the idea of going to all lane running and no hard shoulder, I think the business case still there, but they've got to look at those refuge areas. I think already they've started to put that in place, increase refuge areas to mitigate the risk of people breaking down.
It's interesting.
If I could just add on to that point, I think so. I don't think smart motorways haven't gone away. I think they've just been paused for the moment to be able to do the research and the evidence gathering to then be able to come up with smarter motorways, I think is what they're trying to do. But that's kind of what I was also referring to earlier. You know, when we start looking at modal shift and active travel and electric vehicles as the be all, to maybe the detriment of actually invested. So what could potentially happen then is we're not spending the money on the motorways, we're not doing the things that we should be doing, and that then leads to safety concerns. And safety will always be the #1 priority. So we could end up in a similar situation like smart motorways, where we've developed all this investment, got all these great ideas, and then the minute there's a safety risk, everything gets shut down. And so I think smart motorways still has a massive role to play. I think there's just time being spent to make them smarter, or smart enough to do what they really should be doing. And that, I think, is going to be the case for everything that we are working on over the next few years. It will all be trial and error. These things are brand new. They're not going to work right away. One thing I would like to add, just based on the conversation so far, is just to first of all highlight the differences between National Highways and Transport Scotland. So Transport Scotland is a multimodal industry. I probably should have said they're a multimodal organisation responsible for all modes of transport, whereas National Highways are only responsible for highways. However, they are very much active in terms of encouraging modal shift and promoting people to get out of their cars and travel more, because that actually keeps people safer by reducing car patronage. So just wanted to clarify that. But then just another thing, I think it was one of the panel members mentioned Netflix a minute ago, and it just got me thinking, I mean, we're sitting here considering all of these constraints and challenges, but when you think about it, we're actually being given a really big heads up. We're being told what the future looks like for all of us as an industry. It's mandated to us, so it takes all of that guesswork out. And if the government had mandated, you know, 15 or 20 years ago that streaming services was the way of the future, Blockbuster wouldn't have went out of business. So I suppose the positive is that we're being told what we need to do. We know where we're going. We just need to be really smart about how we get there. And I personally think that's a better position to be in as a business, rather than sitting trying to guess what the future is going to look like and what technology needs to be. It's all been mapped out for us. It's just about how we get there.
It was the behavioural piece that I was interested in, that needs to be considered, in the fact that technology will do so much. No rules for humans. So it's not about being a Luddite, it's about understanding the impact of change. That was quite interesting.
The same argument, of course, will apply to connected and autonomous vehicles. We've already seen the impact of the first accidents in the US, and yeah, the technical developments can take place, the economic advantages are there, but safety comes first. So if that's mismanaged in its execution in the same way, there's a problem in store for us.
But isn't it with autonomous vehicles more of a communication piece, where the question really is, I mean, the human factor in accidents is humongous, right? If we want to talk about, there's already been accidents with autonomous vehicles. I mean, I saw 3 accidents coming here this morning that were people-driven vehicles. You know what I mean? Like, is that not a communication piece more than the
human factor, which is just put the brakes on smart motorways, as we've been discussing, and it's the human factor. If we don't take the public with us, so we don't give them the confidence to take their families out in self-driving vehicles, and if the media will be monitoring it, as they will, it only takes 1 or 2 accidents to set back the implementation of that technology, as we've just been discussing with smart motorways.
Well, I think that part of the problem is different speed of transition. So the difficulty is the technology can sometimes outspeed the ability of the consumer to keep up with it. So historically, you talk about riding, you had horses and nothing changed for hundreds of years, and then the trains came along and everyone kind of got into that. And there were obviously the same, if we were sitting a few hundred years ago, we might have the same conversations around safety and train transport. And then we get the combustion engine, which has been around for 120, 130, 140 years. And it hasn't really changed, even though the efficiency of the cars have changed. But what we're seeing now is a rapid change, aren't we? So, smart motorways, EVs, hydrogen, we're going to, there's going to be so the technology and innovation in terms of investment sort of outpaced the consumer's ability to keep up with it, because we've seen this with our smartphones. The thing is, Apple are bringing out a new phone every 5 minutes, and people just can't afford to keep up with it. They're just, and they're turning their backs on it, so they're refusing. They're saying, no, we're going to stick with this. And I think that infrastructure, that investment in EV and autonomous and all that sort of stuff, we've got to allow that to settle before we kind of move on to the next thing, because otherwise we're just going to go too far ahead. Yet we do need to think about the next thing, because we have to commit to our net zero commitments and stuff like that. So it's a very, very difficult thing for all of us, as consumers, as manufacturers, as in terms of industry and technology and innovation. Because I actually don't think we're going to be, the question really about the dependence we've learned with Ukraine and Russia. We can't be dependent on other countries to supply all the things that we need. We've got to kind of look at how we regionalise that dependency, or we find alternative solutions to that. And I don't think the solution around mobility is entirely around cars and motorways. It's around the way we think differently about how we use public transport, for example, trains and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot. It's complex, but I do optimistically feel that we do shuffle in the right direction. We're not going backwards. We're just caught in a moment, and in a moment there are always going to be concerns around safety and accidents and headlines of this social media world we live in, when just a second after something happens, we all hear about it and we all comment on it, and then things are reacted to, and suddenly we change our minds. And, we've got HS2 at the moment. Again, like smart motorways, a great idea in improving, national infrastructure, but terribly executed. And it's going to have a detriment in the short term, but in the long term, it'll probably be a very successful thing. So, we're on that journey, but at different, like I said earlier, at different places on that journey.
Would you say that the post-COVID increase in, well, post, during, you know what I mean? Increase in hybrid working is actually kind of helping us right now rethink. 'Cause, I mean, the streets are emptier.
I think it's a mixed bag because I've got many hats. I'm also president for the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce for Buckinghamshire, so we sit in a lot of infrastructure meetings around Buckinghamshire specifically. And Schulte and Rail have said that the commute into London in Buckinghamshire has reduced by 40%, and it's not going back. And they know it's not going back because the weekend commute is back to pre-pandemic. So the social commute to London is back to normal, but the business commute back into London is down by 40% and isn't going back. That means 40% of people are hybrid working, they're staying at home, which arguably puts more cars on the road for local, short, small journeys. So you might find that there's an increase in the second-hand EV market because of those short journeys, but then you're potentially cluttering the roads. And I was talking to Pim earlier about the sort of suddenly, you can be on the M40 on a Monday and there's nothing on it because that was the day that everyone chose to work from home. And then you go on Wednesday and it's absolutely back bumper to bumper because that's the day everyone's going into the office. So I think the thing is the hybrid landscape, and we talked about the responsibility employees have for their employees at home, especially around scope 1, 2 and scope 3 specifically in terms of, who's going, we're seeing a lot of businesses deferring their kind of carbon footprint reporting to the fact that people at home are going to have to pay for their own electricity bills, and people at home who are going to have electric cars are charging them from their own home charge points. Therefore, who's paying the bills for that? And if you're a business who's going to now start to report on your carbon footprinting because there are investors' interests or because you're required to do that for your tendering or whatever, are you going to take into consideration the cost of your employees charging their cars at home, or are you going to pretend that's nothing to do with you and you can then report lower, targets, lower data sort of thing? So I think the shift to hybrid working has a lot of problems with it, but I also think it does mean that people, obviously there's less long. I think the thing is people used to commute on trains. 500 people on a train was a lot better than 500 people in individual cars. Not saying that people didn't commute to London in cars and things like that. So I think it's a mixed bag, but we are seeing more people cycling, more people walking, more people choosing, and there's a lot on the radio at the moment about people getting really frustrated and angry because of the cost of fuel and having to use the tube. And it's like, well, hang on a minute, no, the tube's brilliant, so you're seeing a shift in attitude to people changing the behaviour in which they want to travel.
Can I say one thing? Emission from commuting or from your employees working from home is scope 2, so you have to report full stop. There is no way out of that. So business cannot drive down their emission for hybrid work. That is from the SEC report, from the ESOS, from every best practice. So.
Yeah, I know it's there. It's a question of how you police that, isn't it? And how you have the structure that helps businesses understand how they're going to calculate that.
Yeah, well, there are obviously there will be lots of companies trying to saying, yeah, let's take it out. But I guess like the government is putting a set an ESOS in place to police these kind of things, and they've got historical data from companies, and they can compare.
Are companies currently obliged to account for the cost of their employees commuting?
So it's not the cost, it's the carbon footprint. Yes.
Yeah, but there's a carbon footprint embedded in commuting. I
Yes,
can't
yes.
understand the difference between that carbon cost embedded and accounting for that, and working from home with a carbon cost embedded and being required to account for that.
Can I answer on that point? Is that so that's something we've been looking at. So as an SME, we are not obliged to report on sort of commuting into the office. We're definitely obliged to report in terms of business travel and our own vehicle fleet, but it is recommended that we do take into account commuting, and so that is something that we are currently working on just now. So we will speak to our employees and figure out their travel patterns in terms of how they get into and out of the office. Equally, when it comes to reporting your carbon footprint, there is actually there's a number of calculation documents that are available online. So you can actually go in and there's an average figure of the carbon footprint of a person that works from home on a day. And they've taken into account the electricity they might use for their printer, their laptop, etc. And so there's a sort of carbon footprint for one person that works at home one day. So what we'll do is we'll look at our employees and we'll figure out how many days a week they work in the office versus how many days a week they work at home, and we'll take into account that working from home carbon footprint as well as their commute carbon footprint when they start coming into the office. And again, these are things you're not mandated to do at the moment, but moving forward in the future we probably will be. So it's just as well to start looking at these things now and including them in your sort of calculations and measures, because it will just make life easier. But yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah, so I think it's mandatory if you have got more than 250 employees. There is a kind of a rules of the employees and turnover about when you need to report things. But the SME are not mandatory, it's just voluntary at the moment, as Ellie said.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I think it's been a really interesting discussion and there's probably more questions. I do want to remind everyone that after today's event, we will be sharing the presentation, we will be sharing our presenters' details, so you will be able to raise any further questions, or we can do that on your behalf. But thank you to all of our panelists for this discussion. I think it's been great. We're now going to have a 15-minute break and we'll see you back in about 15 minutes. Please grab a coffee and some pastries. I heard they're amazing, so help yourself. But we'll see you later at the next panel.
I'll tell you what, I was more worried about albums. When I saw albums, I thought that's like. So of course they pretty much the audience went straight to the
I hope everyone's had a coffee and a pastry, and I've heard that the chocolate ones are the best, so if you've missed some, there's probably a few left. You can nip out and grab another one. Thank you very much for coming back. We won't go into any more detail, we'll just make a start. I'll hand over straight to Dr. Cristiana Pace, who will talk us through all things future, really. So over to you.
So my presentation will be really short, and it will be a bit more like a bit more different. So like a lot of image, but we'll go into the panel after that. So first of all, I just wanted to introduce our company. So our company is called Enovation Consulting. We work in motorsport and we do sustainability strategy for sport and motorsport. We have been working in motorsport for 25 years on technology, and then after a PhD in sustainability strategy, we just went back to motorsport and needed some help with the transition to sustainability. So we've been working with most of the stakeholders, FIA, Formula One teams, Formula E since 2018. That is the year that we've been funded. We mainly adopt an ESG framework, environmental, social, and governance. So what we try is not just greening the space, as someone would say, is actually create value for the company. There is a cost to sustainability, as they were saying before, but there is a lot of risk not doing sustainability. So it's mainly like risk mitigation of trying to be somewhere at some point in your road where your business doesn't look like is miles behind of where everybody is. For motorsport and sport is a bit easier than for any other business, I would say, because all the federation have already dotted their roadmap. So by 2030, football, rugby, athletic, motorsport, everybody need to have their accreditation done. They have to have other things done. And for general, for SME or for general business, it's a bit more difficult because it's very much nation specific. So you have seen that Kelly has presented the goals for what the English government look like. We got very different goal in Italy. I'm from Italy, and we got quite a lot of business in Italy as well with sport and motorsport. The goals from there for SME are completely different, and the roadmap is very much more accelerating. France and Spain are very much behind, heavily beyond, like very, very far away from everything we're doing, just put it like that. And if you go to US, they don't really have got an ESG framework except for financial business. So the problem is not just SME or English specific. I think the problem of outside sport and motorsport is that there is not unilateral view and agreement of what the roadmap should be and what it should look like. So I took one slide actually from the previous presentation that where we are and the KPMG report, and that is, as Kelly said, is today's mobility offering and the future mobility offering, the technology trends. So if we, and she explained very well this slide, so I'm not going to go over it, but visually what this slide means is a bit this one. So it's like the implication for mobility for the future, for the 2030 vision. And if you see on the top line is what we said that 20 years ago, that mobility would look like in the future. So if you see like autonomous car, we had a picture from, I think, what the 50s or the 70s, what it could look like, and now what it looks like. So lots of things that we imagined to be and to happen 30 years ago, 40 years ago, are actually happening. And it's real, it's what we got now. They look very different from what you would imagine then. And I think it's technology evolve, and also the needs of the population evolves. So very different needs from before. So obviously flying cars, yes, we got some taxis that are already in operation in some country. We imagined that about 40 years ago. So it's not like a new thing. It's something that was already in the horizon. But the technology took very long to happen for these kinds of things. And same things with micromobility. So that was the idea of micromobility at that time. Obviously, it looks very much, very, very different now. And we can do this with another series of technology, hydrogen cars. So that is what an hydrogen car looked like about 15 years ago in a picture, if you've said someone. But actually what they are going to be, or what they are actually normal cars that are just got a different like tank. And the shared mobility services. And the shared mobility services, I think, is a bit different because we all imagined that 10 years ago. We didn't really imagine that 30 or 40 years ago. And what that said to us is the ideas of this kind of future, the 2030 future, actually is an idea that has come ages before, like 2022 or 2020, it's 40 years ago. And it's only in 40 years, we are just developing some solution that match that idea. So we're talking about our vision for 2030, but I think it's really important that we're actually talking beyond 2030, because the idea that we got now and our vision for 2030 will possibly take 20 years. I wouldn't suggest that it would take 40 years to happen, because I think the technology evolution is exponential, is an exponential curve. So it's like we are going to accelerate much more now. But I think we shouldn't think what it will look like in 2030. We should really think what will be like in 2040, because it will take a bit to happen. And one thing that, working in motorsport, one thing that I always say, motorsport is the R&D lab for mobility. So there are a few examples here that actually introduce very well the panel that we'll have, because it's a mixed panel between motorsport and automotive that I'm really happy about it. But these examples are, for example, the Formula E car. That Formula E car is an electric power car that was introduced in 2014. The idea of that car actually born in 2012. But this one is generation 3, that is the one for next year. And that this car has got an amazing pedigree in sustainability, but not just as powertrain, but on materials, on tires, on other technology that are around. So it's like when we talk about sustainability in mobility or what the future mobility looks like, we shouldn't really concentrate just on the powertrains and whether we have got an electric car or a hydrogen car. We should actually look at the whole holistic car itself or mobility sector itself. So consider the charging infrastructure. In fact, generation 3 will have some wireless charging infrastructure in the trucks that will be tested for the 2030 vision. Then we got H24, that is an hydrogen, like LMP kind of cars that will race in the 24 hour of Le Mans next year, I think. So that is a very good, again, R&D lab for what will happen with mobility in the future. Then we got some racing electric scooter that again is about safety, sustainability, micro-mobility, and is the connection with some research and development that was missing in the current e-scooter. And then we got the flying car or your electric boat that we will see possibly coming up in the mobility vision and landscape for 2030 or 2040. So that's it really. It's only a small one because I'm really interested in the panel. Do we have the picture of the panel?
It's okay, we'll just.
Okay, sorry, technology problem as usual.
We're kind of few today, so apologies for that. But thank you, Cristiana. I think that was a really good overview. And I will let you just lead on.
We've got to introduce the panel at first. So as I was saying, the panel is a good representation of the few slides. And I think the panel is a mixture of motorsport people and automotive people. So, and I let them introduce themselves, although I know most of them. So we got Archie Wood-Farmer.
Hello, good morning everyone. So I'm Archie Wood-Farmer, the CEO of Carno. We're a technology startup developing double efficiency, fuel agnostic ceramic engines. So you're probably wondering why are they developing engines when they're banned, but we're not targeting passenger cars. We're targeting off-grid power generation, shipping, and relevant to today, trucking, long-haul trucking in particular. And the engines tend to get very bad press. You know, they're called dirty, etc. But actually, in most ways, they're ideal for the applications. You know, they're useful. So they're cheap, they're compact, they're light, they're very durable, reliable, and we have 130 years of using them and manufacturing them at scale. The two things they're bad at are when operated on fossil fuels, they produce pollutants and CO2 emissions, and they're also inefficient. So our mission is to fix those two, and by doing that, we believe we can produce a technology of choice for our target market. That's in a nutshell.
That's really good, and I'm a big advocate of and electric, and everybody. I think that the propulsion shouldn't be a problem because we can see like a sustainable fuel that is coming up and running, and we hope that it's going to be a speed. And also we know that the mode of transport will be different for different kind of usage. So I think you're doing a great job. I've got a lot of questions for you afterwards. So and
hello everybody, I'm Simon Paul. I'm classed as an independent speaker, which is interesting.
That's making my life
first time I've been called independent. So yeah, without wanting to sound very mythical or mystical, so I've got sort of three hats on, I suppose, really. One, I work for a medium-sized dealer group based in London, car dealership group. So I guess what I recognised a little while ago was that I have worked in that part of the industry for 30 years. And there's a real disconnect between the manufacturers and the dealerships in terms of knowledge, in terms of transfer, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of readiness. So picking up on your point earlier on, that's absolutely what sparked off for me. And I guess I went through 27 years in the industry with my head down thinking servicing cars, selling cars is a great thing, and then had a morality moment when I had children and thought, this isn't right. So trying to now sit in the industry in my privileged spot, I guess, trying to do something about that. Hence why I'm kind of here. So my second hat is I've just launched my own little side business, which is all about training and education to help the public get their head around route to market, specifically with EV, because I'm a bit of a here and now person. So for me, that's whilst there's hydrogen and all the other technologies coming down the road, what we can do today for me is helpful. So I do that. And then my third hat is I'm a commercial director for my dealer group, and we've got 28 properties that have all got glass windows and doors and heaters and solar panels on some of them, but not on others. And because of my role, I understand the leases on those properties and why we would and we wouldn't invest, and the complexities around property management. So it sort of felt to me that my place in the industry, I can actually make some meaningful change at the public end.
That's really great. And we already had an introduction from Richard and Simon, and we got Hrag that is on. Hello, Hrag. Do you want to give a brief introduction?
Yeah, thanks, Cristiana. Yeah, so my name is Hrag Sarkissian. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of the eSkootr Championship. ESC is basically a new sport, and it's the first micro-mobility race series. It revolves around electric scooters, and really we're building a new sport that's accessible, sustainable, and built for the next generation.
So I think the first question for all of you, so each of you actually, is what do you think a European city will look like? I wouldn't say in 2030, I would say 2040 actually, because I think if you want to start with what it looks like 2030, you can, but maybe you could look a bit more far ahead. And we could start with you, Hrag, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think we all probably agree here that cities are growing and becoming more congested, more polluted. So I think part of what we do is really help to promote micromobility and the growth of micromobility, because we do think that that's an important part of the urban ecosystem, especially for a lot of the short distances. So we look at cities like Paris, where they're closing down a lot, or they're shrinking a lot of the car lanes and increasing a lot of the micro mobility, or whether it's bicycles or e-scooters. So definitely more sustainable transportation, a lot more. We really believe that micromobility is starting to play and will continue to only play a bigger role in urban communities. So this is definitely a big one.
Richard, do you want to?
What will they look like 2040? I'm hoping the infrastructure will be in place for certainly charging points, I think for high speed charging points for those short periods that people are in our cities. I can see lots of additional congestion charging, but one thing that sort of really I don't quite understand is that my diesel Mini is free to drive around London, and yet my e-Golf I have to pay a congestion charge. So there's that to get sorted out first, for sure. I'm hoping that it's going to be more accessible by not having too much traffic. So I imagine much more congestion charging will be coming in, and certainly charging points and not necessarily micro-mobility. I think certainly e-buses and connected travel. Yeah, I can see that in 2040.
I don't think we'll be in our own cars in the cities. I think we'll be in shared services. Yeah. I think there'll be a lot more in terms of the autonomous based platform. Hopefully people have learned to park their scooters in appropriate positions. But I think it'll be very different. It's all about convenience. I've got a range of age in my children, and the convenience factor, especially during the COVID times. We see a lot more to do with deliveries of food now, from push bikes to scooters. Everyone wants convenience. And I think in terms of our mobility in the cities, that's just going to carry on. People are going to expect to walk out of their premises and jump into something that takes them to somewhere.
Yeah, I'd support that. I think I think COVID's been the best thing possible for inner city transport, specifically, not for everything clearly. But, I think what that's done is that's forced individuals to rethink about where they go and when they go and why they go there. I mean, clearly it's a hybrid model, and you know, having worked in that part of the industry for 30 years, you know, the word mobility just was never used, and now it's the only word that is used for all the obvious reasons. So yeah, I mean, the infrastructure point, I've got 17 properties inside the M25, and just getting chargers up and running today with the current challenges, route to market is suffocating, frankly. Let alone the actual capacity within the grids. That's the challenge. But you know, I think the answer today is actually in Londoners. Just ask them. They're already there. They already jumped on a tube. They've already got a car parked to the thing. They don't want to pay for residential parking. They're already there. They just need the infrastructure.
And for you, I guess it's not just about the vision of in the city for 2030 mobility, but it's vision for the long haul and other.
Yeah, so long haul trucking, we believe that the best solution for that is a combination of technologies. So a fuel-based technology to give you the range, complemented by battery. So in our instance, we see our engine as a prime mover for an alternator which recharges the battery, and what that allows us to do is operate the engine at peak efficiency, which is a big saver. That can save you, 30% of your fuel, and at the same time, for these large and high power and long range applications, you can reduce the size of the battery, because the size of the battery is a real issue, not just in terms of kind of eating into the truck's payload, but we were talking earlier about 80% of the batteries in the world being manufactured in China. The embedded CO2 emissions from producing those batteries, 1 megawatt hour batteries for trucks, are enormous. So we think there's much more sensible solutions, which is to use a combination of technologies to solve that very difficult sector to address, which is responsible for 25% of CO2 emissions on the roads.
For what concerning where the battery is produced, I think we have to give a lot of credit to Hrag and eSkootrs. It's like most of the eSkooter is actually manufactured in England and in Europe, so it's that emission problem is much lower. But obviously, charging infrastructure must be a problem as well for what concern the championship. So, do you want to elaborate a bit more around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think charging infrastructure is always something, and it's one of those key enablers for smarter cities, for whether it's micromobility or any other form of transportation for that matter. In terms of a racing application, yeah, it's definitely a place where we experiment a lot. So, the scooters is just, electric scooters is just one type of vehicle. But we're looking at things from anything to either, let's say, fast charging technology to wireless or induction charging technology, and really using let's say the sport, the racing environment as a way to develop that and potentially scale it into a mass market. So it's always about how do we make it more efficient, how do we make it more streamlined, and what is the best technology over the long, for each application.
That's really good. And Richard, McLaren did supply the batteries for the Generation 2 Formula E cars. So you've seen 4 years of advancement of batteries technologies. How that is playing out in the Vision 2030 landscape.
Yeah, so those batteries, you're right, they're pretty much 4 years old now. The advancements moved on to Williams, who had the generation 1 battery. So we had the 2, so they've now got the 3. So, you know, it'd be interesting to see the differences between the two batteries. But basically, the battery that's currently in the Formula E cars is developed by a road car manufacturer, although it's not necessarily road relevant. It does show you the sort of level of technology between, I think, generation 1 and generation 2 is that the technology change was the fact that in generation 1 they had to change cars to finish a race. They had to pull in, get out, getting another car and carry on. Generation 2, our battery was enough to complete a race. So it'd be really interesting to see what generation 3 is going to bring, and it's probably going to be capacity, power, efficiency, you know, and everything else. So it'll be the next step, and so on and so forth. And I think, you know, Delta may get that, you know, in the following year, and so on and so forth. So we all feed off each other, and we all learn off each other. It's interesting, but yeah. So generation 3 is the next one. Williams Advanced Engineering are running a battery for that, and yeah, let's see how that pans out.
And can you see in Delta some of the battery development that you've done for motorsport being applied to automotive and be relevant for this vision 2030?
Yeah, I think most of it is the other way still at the moment. So we first did our first electric road car back in sort of 2010. So we've been on the journey for a long time, and the crossover into motorsport has come more from automotive, as Richard was saying. I think now, because things are getting pushed more within high performance applications, and not just motorsport, it's in environments where they're particularly challenging, you know, high temperature environments or low temperature environments, or, you know, up in high atmospheric conditions that push the performance window of the technology a little bit further, that then cross over into other sectors. So, you know, coming back to what I was saying earlier about the management of the temperature and the management of the system, that is critical. In motorsport applications where you're, you know, that's part of what you do, you monitor the system more closely. And once you've got that greater understanding, then you can look to dumb that down and then transfer it across. But I think automotive in particular has pushed the technology a lot harder than what motorsport did initially. So it's coming the other way. And I think the same will be in other sectors. So it will trade between the two.
You want to add something, Simon? Or
Not on that topic.
Something like that. So just one other question for you, Hrag, is like obviously like eSkootr, as many of the motorsport and automotive company were in the innovation lab at Goodwood. And I don't think that people are familiar very much with the eSkootr Championship and your mission and the vision and how the development you're doing are relevant for this vision 2030. So I don't know if you want to elaborate a bit more on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sits on multiple points really, and obviously on one side it's really helping drive the micromobility sector. I mean, we all know that every form of mobility has benefited from sport and sporting competition, in the sense that racing is an innovation lab, it's an incubator, and really helps accelerate the development of safety and technology. And today, micromobility is at that stage. It's at that stage where it is growing very quickly, and the way micromobility was introduced into cities was primarily through venture capital, not from the city legislation itself. So it happened in the other way around, in the sense that cities are playing a little bit of catch up as to they're realizing the importance of these, they're realizing how quickly it's growing, and it's more about how do we integrate this, how do we make sure that they work properly in cities. And I think someone mentioned about COVID. I think COVID was a great thing in the sense that it created also this demand. It made people aware of this demand of personal mobility. Where again, micromobility was really launched from a shared mobility concept initially. So more and more people are buying vehicles, more and more people are riding them, And so this is really where the opportunity for us is to bring all these different stakeholders, whether it's operators, manufacturers, cities, and really help shape the sector. You know, from a technology perspective, you know, safety is obviously a really big one as well. It's probably the biggest one. And it's, you know, it's so, you know, from a safety perspective, it's looking at safety as a whole system rather than, you know, like helmets. It's everything, how they work together, you know, helmets, barriers, the data. And then, you know, the other thing that's really important is, you know, the fact that we also have the Commission for Micromobility and Sport, which is the, you know, the governing body, the regulator for the sport. And, you know, I'm sure Cristiana can talk about that, but it's really playing two roles here. On one hand, it's governing the sport and really, you know, governing them at the highest standard, you know, and really building the credibility of the sport. But on the other, it's also making sure that there's always relevance between, you know, the track and the streets, basically. So whether it's on the safety side, on the medical side, on the sustainability side, and it's, you know, it's enabling the transfer of technology. It's enabling really that relationship, basically. So yeah, and then the other thing obviously is that in the end we are also a sport. So it's, you know, the accessibility of it is really, really important to us, because it's giving people an opportunity to be part of something, giving, you know, much more people an opportunity to be part of something, and create this movement, you know, that, you know, on one hand, you know, brings new athletes, new talents into the picture, but on the other is really helping accelerate and shape the, you know, the whole sector.
That's great. And you mentioned two aspects there, that is the accessibility and legislation, that brings us to the next question. And like we talk about electric, and we talk about like micromobility, electric micromobility again. So that's one question. Another question is, would the government need to do more to actually accelerate other forms of propulsion, not just electric, for example, sustainable fuel or hydrogen? If we have to reach this zero emission, are we just using electric, or should we just move and using other solutions as well?
So I think the government can do more. What we particularly like to see, you know, so we regulate tailpipe emissions, but it's not tailpipe emissions that are going to prevent us from, you know, hitting 2 degrees global warming. It's not even well to wheel, it's life cycle emissions. And what we'd like to see is, if you know, manufacture your powertrain in a place where, you know, it's got a high carbon intensity electricity mix, then you should pay a carbon price for that. And I think, you know, that would encourage manufacturers to think about, you know, coming back to places where we've actually got quite a green, you know, mix of electricity compared to a lot of other countries. So I think that's important. And for us, we'd like to see any kind of legislation and regulation be technology agnostic. So we're trying to solve some incredibly difficult challenges that, you know, what the end goal is, you know, is to produce zero emissions. So there's no point in kind of, you know, if you remove any kind of politics from it, there's no point in specifying what path, you know, the industry should take to get there. You know, support all the potential solutions, and you know, let the market decide.
That's really good.
I think for me, sitting in the industry, the fines that are applied to the manufacturers at the EU level is just too an instrument. And I guess where I see that coming through in my part of the world is that really what I think what the governments forget about the manufacturers are at the big, you know, the big volume manufacturers. Ultimately, they've got shareholders, and ultimately they've got profits, and ultimately they're a sales machine with massive plants all around the world that have got pump out cars. And my interpretation of how they've interpreted the challenge is they've gone to the quickest route to get those emissions down, which is essentially cut out all the high polluting vehicles. So, you know, I work for Glasgow group, Carno, Gothars, and the like are all on the missing list. And they've really all they've done is replace them with ID4s and 40, 50,000 pound cars, forgetting that actually the mix of models and the segmentation is far wider and greater than they allow for. So to come all the way back to the question, which is what the governments do, stop using blunt instruments to try and affect change with manufacturers that have been in play for much longer than Boris Johnson's career.
I mean, I think picking up on a few points, really, that sport, you know, no doubt has the ability to change hearts and minds of people. We need to be able to back that up, and similar to Simon's point about charging infrastructure. So most people that transition to an electric car, you know, it's more expensive, but they're potentially prepared to do that. But the driving experience is nice and relaxing. But if you can't back that up with a charging infrastructure, then it's all lost, and those people will be turned off from making that transition, and they'll take them a lot longer to go back. So we've got to be able, the education piece is critical, to allow people to understand what it is. You know, we were talking earlier about some of the charging. What does it mean? What does 7 kilowatts, 13 kilowatts, what does it mean? You know, it's a big barrier to what we're trying to do. The vehicles are coming through, they might be coming through with some reliability issues, but that's what happens when you're pushing technology. You've got to back it up with the ability to be able to provide people with the services they need, and that is simple charging infrastructure. And you know, it's just not there.
I've got 2 questions on that actually. One question is, we always talking about fast charging, but actually someone that comes to watch the F1 in Silverstone, he stays here for 7 hours and he doesn't go to swap his car after 2 hours. So are we in the right route with this fast charging, or should we actually looking at slow charging for some points like this, your stadium, your circuit, your shopping center?
This is another point when government need to step in with their not so blunt instruments and realise that fast chargers need to be on motorways, and accessibility and home charging can be slow, so the draw on the grid is not so innocuous for something. There's lots of charges out with load balancing and the like. So there's the technology is there, but the moment I don't think the government are doing enough to think through the legislation.
And can sport help to think with it, to just showcase this kind of different solution and different approach?
Yeah, I think it can, and I think everyone's influenced by sport. I think it's probably the original influencer, isn't it? To get, you know, the whole thing about the 2012 Olympics, the whole inspiration and people getting on board with sport again. You know, as we've seen the results of that in our athletes moving on into being inspired in 2012 and now obviously competing and winning gold. So yeah, sport is a massive influencer, and I think motorsport generally is huge. And I know we've said it again, we'll say it one more time, but Netflix has really sort of, you know, put motorsport really on the global scale, certainly in America and in China. So yeah, we have a responsibility to show that there are options. So we run you know, electric generation on multiple areas of the car to charge the battery, and we also run super efficient internal combustion engines that needs to come across in education really, and you know, the showcase is there to see. The racing aspect is probably the most exciting thing. Whether or not people know what's under the engine cover is a different matter. But that will come with time, and I think motorsport is a great platform for the like eSkootr Championship. You know, that's certainly hit a great generational. It's come at the right time, I think, providing they park them in the right place. but it's come at the right time, and Formula E is, as I say, let's wait to see what the next generation of battery can produce in terms of racing closeness. But I always think, going back to the manufacturers, they need to give their customers a choice. And this is what Toyota, BMW and Volkswagen Audi Group are doing. The target is 2035, right? This is for passenger cars and trucks. The target is 2035. The governments in the EU and the British government have said, that's it. And I think that's what they need to do. They just need to put a stake in the ground and say 2035. And this is the target you need to meet. And it's up to the car manufacturers to then to try and meet that with a range of choices, because Australia, for example, the sheer distances they have to travel couldn't necessarily use anything other than a stonking V8. You know, in the States, cross-state driving, you know, electric really isn't going to it's going to help. It can help the range, but the realism is it's going to be some sort of level of either combusted fuel, whether that be hydrogen. You've got to still remember, a hydrogen car is still a burnt fuel. We're still burning something. It's certainly not, you know, it's not renewable. But we have to encourage the manufacturers to give us a choice, and to do that, we have to sort of say we want the reliability, we want the sustainability, we want the infrastructure to be in place.
I have to say one thing about parking eSkootr. And that's really good things about the championship. The championship actually has implemented special pods where you parking the scooter after to actually cooling down. So the scooter are now parked anywhere straight. And I'm sure that Hrag will be happy to ask you and Richard to go and see a race, so you can actually see what they've done. So I know that normally it's a problem, but that is not the problem. So
I believe people are getting paid to actually tidy up the scooters and charge the scooters as well.
So companies that go around with vans.
So that is the big problem, I think, on life cycle assessment of scooter that came out, and is part of one of the commission projects for the Micromobility Exports Commission that Hrag was mentioning that I sit on. That's why I know about it. So the life cycle assessment of scooter actually is really high compared to electric vehicles because of the banks that need to go and recharge them, and the way that they operate that is included in their life cycle assessment because it's part of the mobility as a service. So one of the things that the championship is doing is actually reviewing some life cycle assessment of all the micromobility providers to actually come out with a kind of one for infrastructure, one for devices, and align it to be the electric car. So we got a question.
Yeah, I was just going to say that one of the biggest inputs on commercial vehicle driving for efficiency is a driver's right foot. So what's the difference between somebody driving an electric van at 90 on the motorway, which you can witness now, or a petrol vehicle? So have we got an opportunity there to think about resource use, which is the danger with net zero? It's about resource use for me. We've got an opportunity there to say, what do we do about trying to make sure we're making the best use of resource? And if you look at home delivery at the minute, home delivery at the moment does not fit, in my view, the glossy brochures of DHL earnings. I think we can all agree that Kevin turn up in his Austin Maestro, delivering parcels and throwing them out. That's not the image. There's a bit of a discourse here. Is there an opportunity to change that behaviour along with the technology?
I think so, yeah. And one thing that I think will dramatically change how, you know, particularly long haul trucking, if we're focusing on that, works is autonomous trucking. So, you know, we're already seeing some trials being had, but then, because what limits the kind of operational mode of trucks at the moment is driver. You have to stop every 4.5 hours, you're only allowed to do 11 hours a day, etc. But long haul trucking, autonomous trucking will allow you to travel until the truck runs out of fuel. And I think rather than have this hub spoke kind of model where, you know, logistics companies are trying to put the hub near all their delivery points, and then you get the little vans. There'll be a lot less hubs, and they'll be going you know, a lot longer distances, and I think that will very much help with reducing the number of kind of short, inefficient journeys that you get. Having said that, I wouldn't think that that's going to come into play until, you know, 2040, that type of thing. But I always think with everything to do with decarbonisation, only part of it is technology. There's a huge part to play in terms of you know, operational use, being efficient, that type of thing.
Any other question?
Yeah, just I guess this is more for Richard and Simon, because I'm also working with Carno, so I'm kind of in this stakeholder anyway. Do you see sustainable fuels like those produced from waste to energy, biofuels, e-fuels, as a solution for the mass market in the West, or as a fuel for things like motorsport, luxury vehicles, emerging economies, and I guess aerospace? Where's the line in your opinion? How much can we produce, and where is it going to be used? Touching on the resource conversation.
Biofuels. We are heavily invested. Well, no, I'm not. We're not at all. The Formula One teams, the oil producers in Formula One teams, people like Petronas, Shell, they are heavily invested and using Formula One as a showcase where possible. I don't know, Cristiana, probably you know more than me. I don't know if we've actually tested anything yet.
Yeah, we have.
We have. Well, that's great news. But yeah, so these are starting to use Formula One teams as a bit of a breakthrough, as a bit of a platform for that. I think they do have a future. Whether or not they sort of bridge a gap, you know, well, like I say, we've got the contract to run the entire grid in Formula One right up to 2030. So clearly they are using an internal combustion engine. But, you know, we could be seeing more of a transition towards e-fuels, sorry, not e-fuels, because they are technically still burned. Biofuels, potentially up to 2030 and beyond. If people want the internal combustion engine as a choice, we've got to give people a bit of a choice to see if they can still hit, because they can still hit their targets, but still using internal combustion engine, right? So if we give them that choice to reach that target using a fossil fuel or a biofuel, then, you know, if they reach their target, they reach their target. So I can see that.
Just to clarify that point a little bit, I think my question is more focused around the volume of potential production of a sustainable fuel.
That is the problem that there is at the moment. So sustainable fuel exists, and there is lots of different sustainable fuel. There is sustainable fuel that have one use, then there is net zero fuel that C1 is producing, then there is the e-fuel that is completely different one, and then there is the biofuel generation one that is going to be banned. So there is also like a misconception on what sustainable fuel is. There is a lot of, but all of that cannot make up enough for using in your car, because they're all sucked up from motorsport. So all they will be. So at this point in time, it's like P1 cannot produce enough for all Dakar grid, for example. So, and they all produce proper drive. So it's kind of like they are trying to increase the amount that they produce, but whether we are going to arrive to a level that is produced for like mass transportation, we don't know. What we know that is really good result that is with your normal car, you can run biofuel and you only lose 10% of performance at the moment. That is not very much, because like it doesn't make much of a difference of how fast you're going to go. So in that term, so it's going to be a really good solution if it can be produced up, scale up to production. And at the moment, that doesn't seem to be the case, and that's why party law is involved with another
sustainable fuel, zero fuel, zero petroleum. That is what they're trying to do, to trying to forecast in 2030 to scale up to a certain level that they can actually run in normal cars. So the debate whether there is two problems on scaling up to sustainable fuel or better biofuel. So one problem is that biofuel comes from crops, generation one. So that is going to be banned in Europe from next year. So you can only have generation two that comes from waste, and there is only a certain amount of waste you can use. So it's kind of like, again, is the problem about let's recycle it, let's collect it so we can use it. And at the moment, there is not enough people that collect it to use it. That is the reality of things on where we are with that.
Yeah, I had an idea of the answer anyway.
We certainly, you know, we are an R&D platform. Motorsport's always been that. So, you know, since the inclusion of curves and things like that, there's always been a bit of an R&D platform. But whether or not it takes off, you know, I don't know yet.
And it's the same problem with the hydrogen, I guess. I don't know what you think about hydrogen. It's like Switzerland has a fantastic hydrogen infrastructure at the moment, and it's the only one that can produce green hydrogen in Europe, but you cannot find green hydrogen anywhere else. So it's like, do we really want to use hydrogen cars or hydrogen trucks? Because at the moment, the Hyundai produce hydrogen trucks, but where are you going to refuel it?
So I guess on that, this kind of taking off of the hydrogen economy has happened very recently. You do have, I think it's over 1,000 green hydrogen projects all around the world. But for me, the key advantage with hydrogen is it's an energy vector. So all the places where you can produce the cheapest renewable electricity because you have the highest capacity factor are where you've got a desert next to the sea. And all those places are where you have no demand. So for me, that is a key advantage of hydrogen, being able to produce it in these produce renewable electricity in these places where, you know, it would otherwise be stranded, and then, you know, convert it into molecules, and then, you know, for us, use it to solve very difficult markets to decarbonize.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think hydrogen is just part of the solution. You know, for Cosworth, we look at it across not just ICE, but our own range, extend our motor turbine product. But again, it's the messaging. It's green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, brown hydrogen. What does it all mean? What does it mean to the consumer? And making sense, understanding the reality of it, the infrastructure. You know, it feels very much like where electric was, you know, a few years back, where it's a lot of noise without the delivery line to it. So, you know, we need to see the delivery line, understand it, and relate to it, and then people will get on the journey.
Any other question?
Yeah, just an important point. It's you know, currently 280 million cars in Europe, and the average age of cars is actually getting older. So it's over 11 now. So I think everyone is very much focused on buying replacement vehicles. In my opinion, that's probably fundamentally wrong. We should be looking at alternative transport, or actually looking at how we can repurpose those vehicles or convert them to sustainable fuels. So I think replacing, I mean, I think today announced that 50% of car sales in London are EVs. Is that a good thing? Because, you know, they were buying lots of SUVs before, and now they're buying really heavy EVs when they should actually perhaps be walking or using the tube or using the bus. So I think it's got things to do with looking at you know, there was no silver bullet, but let's look at the existing vehicle park and see how we could modify that perhaps.
The point with the heavier equipment, because public transport buses are a lot longer lifestyle outside London. You look at a school bus now, when it spews out smoke behind it in this area, it's about 30 years old.
Yeah.
You can have that technology in place for a long time before it gets replaced. So it's got to be the right equipment so we can scale it out to the provinces.
So, and I think that's come back to one of the questions that was done in the other panel about changing behavior, what we're doing for changing behavior. So at the moment, we think that the replacing with electric vehicles is the solution, but because we don't consider the full life cycle assessment of your charging infrastructure and when you charge where your electricity comes from, that's possibly 66% coming from fossil fuel if you're in England, and other things like that, but also like things like eSkootr championship that Hrag is the CEO are important for changing behavior and explaining people that there are other mode of transport that they can use rather than their car when they're in city or their moped or anything like that. So I guess this is also behavioral change of what people replace vehicles with. Any last question? I think we don't.